In this video, I'm going to lay out for you the reasons why Ron Logan is not Bridge Guy. I'm not trying to change anyone's mind with this video, but hopefully I'm able to give you some information that you didn't have before so you can make a more educated decision on if Ron Logan was Bridge Guy or not. But here's a hint, he's not. Let's go.
Scott, this investigation here, search started 6 hours ago. There's no sign of it letting up soon. We have the FBI, state, and local police searching the house, the garage, the outbuildings, the field behind the outbuildings, even into the woods. This is just a few hundred yards away from where the girls' bodies were found. Police seized hands full of evidence, hauled away Ron Logan's pickup truck, and searched the home, garage, and farm buildings with the help of a canine. Investigators warn against drawing any conclusions. Since their investigation began 4.5 weeks ago, they've conducted dozens of searches, interviewed scores of potential suspects, and given some of them polygraph tests. Police arrested Logan earlier this week on an unrelated probation violation. He has a history of drunk driving convictions, but no record of more serious or violent crimes.
By driving a vehicle and consuming alcohol in February. Now, a friend of his came to the defense of the 77-year-old that is, in court today.
I mean, many times I've spent time with him, and so I would have been willing to do anything for him. He's a good guy.
Okay, here's the main, not only, but main reason why law enforcement thinks Ron Logan is innocent. Because they know where he was that day. They know that Ron Logan was on the road at 3:50 p.m. for a 30-minute drive to Aquarium World, where he was from 4:20 p.m. to 5:20 p.m. There's not only witnesses that confirm this, but there's also a receipt to prove that this trip happened and where he was at what time. I think they also use cell site location information to triangulate his location. If you want proof that they had used his cell phone data, look no further than the March 17th FBI search warrant. So yes, it seems like I'm claiming they knew Ron Logan wasn't responsible for the murders before they did a search warrant on his house. And yes, that's what I think, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Keep in mind, when writing a search warrant, law enforcement is going to pick and choose what information they include. They're obviously only going to include the things that make a person look guilty. So here's how the FBI used Ron Logan's cell phone data to make him look guilty. For example, Libby and Abby were abducted at 2:13 p.m. on February 13, 2017, and they knew that Ron Logan was on his phone at 2:09 p.m. They also know who he was talking to, and they also know how long that phone call was. So what would you think if Ron Logan was on the phone call from 2:09 p.m. until, say, 2:25 p.m.? Knowing the girls were abducted at 2:13 p.m. and Bridge Guy was recorded by Libby's phone, you would have to ask, was Bridge Guy on the phone during the abduction? Didn't seem like it. Now, using cell phone data, they couldn't tell exactly where he was, but again, they leave things out. So if his flip phone did have GPS, like a lot of them did, that statement would be something like this. Using GPS data, we were able to determine where Ron Logan was within 10 to 15 feet of his location, which was inside of his house. Whoops, better not put that in the search warrant. So that would show that he was at his house at 2:09. Therefore, he's not Bridge Guy. I'm just making the claim that I believe cell phone data played a huge part in determining Ron Logan was not Bridge Guy. All right, let's go back to the March 17th search of Ron Logan's property. I was always curious as to what took them so long to search his property, because after all, it was the property where the girls' bodies were found. I mean, they searched at least 3 other houses before they searched Ron's. They searched the Maxwells, the Kleins, and the Webbers. So it seems like they would have searched Ron Logan's first, but what do I know? All right. Regardless of when they searched his property, after they knew that he was elsewhere during the crimes, they still wanted to know if the killer left anything at his property, maybe even without Ron realizing that the killer left something. It's also possible that they wanted to know if Ron was involved in the murders in some way without him having to actually be there. Maybe they wanted to see if they could find anything that suggested Ron was aiding and abetting the actual killer.
The location poses a forensic challenge, but it could also be a clue. Authorities train their focus on the man who owns the land where the bodies were found, a 77-year-old retiree named Ronald Logan.
It occurred on his property. The thought process was to determine, did he have some form of a connection? Did he know someone? I mean, it's an area where he does allow individuals to hunt on that property.
So on February 13th, 2017, Ron Logan made 2 trips that day. He drove twice. One, he went to the transfer station, the recycling center, from 11:38 a.m. to 12:13 p.m. The second trip, he went to Aquarium World. It's a fish store about 30 minutes away, and that trip was from 3:50 p.m. until 5:50 p.m. And how do I know these details? Well, a big piece of information that has been missing from the general public is this 5-page ISP report. It essentially is a report on an interview that took place between an ISP officer and Ron Logan. This took place on March 15th, 2017. And here's what it says. On Thursday, February 16th, Detective Tim Kendall spoke to Logan at his residence. Logan told Kendall that on 2/13, he woke up around 9 o'clock and then worked outside with his farm animals. Logan said that his cousin, David Nolf, came to his house around noon. According to Logan, Nolf drove him to the transfer station outside of Delphi to drop off trash. Okay, so here's the original FBI search warrant statement. Logan did not ask Nolf to provide an alibi for his drive to the transfer station on February 13th, 2017. Logan only asked Nolf to provide an alibi for a trip that would have occurred at the time of the apparent abduction of LG and AW. So now that we have the 5-page ISP report and this information that came from it and comparing it with the FBI search warrant, now we know that that FBI search warrant was misleading at best. Ron absolutely lied about both the transfer station and the fish store. And this shows that he lied because he was trying to cover up for the fact that he was driving. And whether he asked his cousin to lie for him about the transfer station is irrelevant. The fact that he lied to the police is what's important, because that trip to the transfer station was so much earlier than the murders, it was irrelevant to the murders. But yet he lied about it anyways, because he wanted to cover up, again, for driving, not for the murders. And another thing that I realized after looking at both the ISP report and the FBI search warrant is that I was incorrect when I thought Ron provided a false alibi, because I've said that before. Well, and it does use that word alibi right in here, but a false alibi means presenting incorrect information about one's location during the time a crime was committed to avoid getting in trouble. And Ron Logan never actually lied about a time or a location. The only thing he lied about was who was driving. He never lied about where he went or the time that he went there. So I apologize for any confusion, because I had in the past said that Ron Logan did lie about his alibi, and that's wrong. Now, lying to law enforcement about anything is definitely suspicious, but I just wanted to be clear that Ron had a bunch of motivation to lie about driving on February 13th or driving anytime, because if law enforcement knew that he was driving, he knew that he would get thrown in prison, which he did.
Handcuffed and shackled, Ronald Logan pleaded guilty to a felony charge of being a habitual traffic violator today. Logan admitted to driving on a suspended license and drinking alcohol, violations of his probation.
So why would Ron ask his cousin at 9 a.m. on the 14th to cover for him? Well, that's because on February 13th, the night before, his neighbors and volunteers and law enforcement were searching the area. And knowing that he broke the law earlier that day by driving without a license, and knowing that he would go to prison if he was caught doing that, he came up with a plan. I mean, it's pretty obvious if you have law enforcement looking for missing girls around your property that they're eventually going to talk to you. They're going to want to know where you were and what you did that day. If you tell them that you were driving around, you're going to go to prison. So that's why Ron lied. He asked his cousin to say that he drove him around that day. Ron never lied about where he was or what time he was there. The only thing he lied about was who drove, because he simply didn't want to go to prison.
This is breaking news from Channel 13 Eyewitness News.
And we'll get a look at weather and traffic for you in a moment. But first, we do want to get to that breaking news from overnight. A desperate search to find 2 young teenage girls reported missing.
2 Indiana families filled with uncertainty this morning. Our Naomi Peskovitz is in Delphi right now, where volunteers searched, Naomi, really late into the night trying to track down these girls. What's the latest on the situation there?
Yeah, and Ben and Julia, we've seen people walking into this trail over the last hour or so, volunteers who don't even know the family. Also online, folks are saying they are still out searching, even though it's dark, it's early in the morning, and the official crews, law enforcement, they have stopped their search for the evening, and they'll continue when the sun comes up.
And there's another point I want to make about Ron Logan and how he was lying. In the FBI search warrant, it states Logan told Nolf to say he returned around 5 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. But thanks to the ISP report that we now have, We know that Ron arrived at the fish store at 4:20 and he left by 5:20 p.m. There's a receipt that proves that. So the earliest he got home was 5:50 p.m., not between 5 and 5:30 p.m. as initially stated. Now, the murders occurred at 3:30 p.m. So why would he lie to make it look like he was home closer to the time of the murders than he actually was? Normally, if someone were to fabricate their whereabouts to avoid suspicion, they would claim a time far removed from the crime, not closer. So the fact that he lied and he made it closer to the crime time shows that he never tried to provide a false alibi. He just didn't want law enforcement to know that he was driving that day. And to point something out so it doesn't get overlooked is Ron Logan had to leave his house at 3:50 p.m. and at 3:57, there was a man seen walking down the road looking muddy and bloody, or maybe like he just got in a fight, towards a CPS building where the killer parked. And at 3:57 p.m., Ron Logan was driving on the road heading to the fish store. Translation, Ron Logan isn't bridge guy. But if you still want proof, we could keep going. So back to the timeline and why Ron Logan isn't bridge guy. From the ISP report, Ron was in that fish store for about an hour. He checked out at 5:20 p.m., so that means he got to the fish store at 4:20 p.m. The search warrant tells us that it's a 30-minute drive to get to the fish store from his house. So that means he would have had to leave his house at about 3:50 if he was in fact in the store for an hour, which from what I'm told, that's correct. And since the girls were killed at 3:30, so from 3:30 to 3:50 in 20 minutes, 77-year-old Ron Logan would have to walk from the crime scene to his house, gets there, has to take off his clothes before going inside, take off your shoes, take off your jacket, all that stuff, probably take a shower. You would have to then get dressed after, then you would probably have to clean up the shower, dispose of those clothes, maybe you burn them, get rid of them, hide any evidence, hide the murder weapon, make sure that you cleaned up anything that you tracked in, you make sure you're calm and collected, that you're good to go, and you're back in the truck at 3:50, driving on your way to the fish store. That is impossible to pull off. And it's just another reason why Ron Logan isn't bridge guy. Okay, so to wrap this chapter up, Logan lies about his cousin's visits because he's scared to go to prison for driving with a suspended license, not because he needed to create a false alibi for the murders. The impossible timeline, the receipt from the fish store, and the cell phone data obtained from Ron Logan's phone provide the evidence that show he was elsewhere during the time of the murders, proving his innocence.
Obviously, nobody, including all of our family, has ever been cleared of anything like this on the most official of capacities, but Ron has not been looked at for a considerable amount of time because they do know where he was, and it was an unfortunate circumstance that his property line was where the girls were found.
All right, now let's take a look at these forensic photo comparisons, and I will try to behave. So this forensic photo comparison was done by world-renowned sketch artist Lois Gibson. And I don't want to take anything away from Lois because she's like a world-class sketch artist. And I just think she was set up to fail here, being asked to do something that is scientifically unsound and try to make it seem legit when it's not. So just right off the bat, the biggest knocks that there are about a photo comparison is the lack of standardization involved. It's highly subjective. There's the absence of statistical validation. There's confirmation bias because it doesn't include blind testing. And there's a high error rate. It's not an accurate method. In a true controlled comparison, the only variable should be the person in the photo that you're comparing to the control photo. But it is virtually impossible to do this task because to only have one variable, you need to have the test photo that you're comparing to the control photo. It would have to be taken at the same time by the same camera, from the same angle, using the same method by the same person, and each photo would need to be the same quality resolution, not to mention the subjects in each photo would need to be standing in the exact same location, having the same body pose, including their limbs. They have to be in the exact same position. They would need to be dressed the same, which is very important. But with all those things said, let's take a look at it anyways. Okay, let's look at this first form of comparisons. All right, what she says here, that it is impossible to make perfect comparison between individuals in different photos, which is correct. That is one thing we agree on. She acknowledges it's nearly impossible, but goes through with it anyways. Respect. Okay, let's keep going. Comparing suspect A to known person B, there are several similarities and one remarkable similarity. Okay. All right, so looking at this, A and B both seem to be males of similar height. Okay, if you say so, because, when you scale things, you can make someone as tall or small as you want. So Lois also claims that both Subjects have similar hip to shoulder width ratios. Okay. Subject B has unusually large, roundly protruding belly. Subject B has a jacket that appears, okay, here, she made a mistake here. So it looks like she made a mistake by saying instead of subject B has a jacket, I think she means subject A. So again, there's another variable, the human error element of things. But let's pretend she meant subject A has a jacket that appears to be accommodating to a belly that is the same size and shape as B. Please don't tell me this is a remarkable finding. So we're comparing a person's belly that we could see because he's not having it concealed with a jacket. We're comparing that belly to a person who's wearing a jacket that is concealing their belly, and it looks like they have things jammed into their jacket. So we really have no idea how this person's belly looks. It's like she's not even trying anymore. So imagine arguing this in court. So here's another photo comparison. Photo above left to right is an image of known person B, laid atop an image of a suspect A, and verifying degrees of transparency. Okay, let's stop here. All right, this is definitely a flawed method. And since there's no mention of spatial scaling being used, I'm not going to assume that there was, right? So let's say you have a picture of two different people and you want to compare them. You could just easily adjust it, scale it, all you want. You can make it look however you want. You can make a small person tall, a tall person small. You can make them wider. You can make them skinnier. So when you do scaling like this on a resized picture, it also distorts the image. So it potentially leads to incorrect conclusions. For instance, if you shrink someone down like this, their features become compressed and vice versa. And what this does is you could essentially make two entirely different people appear very similar when they're not. So this is why this comparison is invalid and why it's unscientific. I mean, ideally, you would have one variable, maybe two, but there's over 10. I mean, it's just too much. This is invalid. This comparison means nothing. You might as well have a kid draw two different pictures in crayon and say those are the same people and they're both Ron Logan, or this is about as legit as that. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. You could check out this article. I'll put the link in the description and you could look and see what it says here. And now, speaking of unscientific, I'll do my own analysis, which is going to be subjective, but I want to get your opinion, not mine. Let's see what you think. So you can see how he's dressed here at the transfer station versus what Bridge Guy was wearing. Obviously, Ron Logan's wearing these taller boots here, which if he was planning to take the girls across the creek, you would think he would keep those boots on. Those look a lot better than what Bridge Guy's wearing. Also, his pants are different, and Ron Logan just has longer legs than Bridge Guy. But they are dressed different. That means after this transfer station trip, he would have to go back home and change his clothes into something similar. Now, yes, he's dressed similar to Bridge Guy, but it's not exact if you take a good look at it. So why would he change out of these clothes and go put on different clothes that are less optimal for crossing a creek? Doesn't make any sense. He doesn't seem like the type of person to have wardrobe changes throughout the day. Look, the same clothes he's wearing here at the transfer station, he wears them just a few days later during an interview. So I doubt he has a bunch of clothes that he likes changing in and out of. Now, this is from an FBI case study where it involved 92 offenders. It compiles cases from 1960 to 2006. And what you're looking at is offenders versus victims' age. What I think is important is people 61 to 76 did not kill anyone. People 77 and up did not kill anyone. Now, Rick Allen is 44, so he falls into this area where there's 52 offenders. He's definitely less likely to kill than someone who's 14 to 29. Or another way of looking at it is he's in the second highest bracket. Depends how you look at it. Well, I did a search online and I looked for people in the United States, someone who would kill a stranger, as this situation calls for. And the oldest person I could find in America in history was a 76-year-old. So that means if Ron Logan was a killer, he would be the oldest person to ever kill strangers in the United States ever in the whole history.
Violent with her in the past, and as you heard in that clip, that when she heard that voice, she thought right away that it was Ron Logan.
Now let me tell you about the tip line that we had up there in Delphi. And we would tell anybody that called up with a tip to give it to law enforcement. If they didn't want to talk to law enforcement, we sent it over to law enforcement. Okay. This is very, very important. Okay. Because a person that seems to be accusing Ron Logan of being a killer is like his ex-girlfriend or an ex-wife or something like that. The tips we got, a lot of the tips we got that said it was a certain person, and these people were sure of it. And they were pretty much all women, and they were pretty sure that they were right about who Bridge Guy was. Well, the bottom line is it was either their ex-boyfriend or their ex-husband or somebody that was next door like a neighbor. But most of the tips on who Bridge Guy specifically was were from girlfriends, ex-girlfriends, and ex-wives. And we looked at all that. We looked at all the ones we got. Okay? And I believe that they believed they were 100% correct. Because, Bridge Guy, based on what we could see, looked like pretty much anybody. Okay? But they totally believed it was their ex. And I believe that's what they believed. Not that they were lying or making it up. They just believed that based on whatever took place in their relationship. So I think that's important for you all to know. Okay? Because this, an ex-girlfriend or wife coming forward, blaming it on an ex-husband because of the domestic problems they had in their marriage or relationship. I have to tell you, it's all too often very common to get those on tip lines. And we've seen it many, many, many times.
Without verified police reports of domestic violence, it's hard for me to accuse Ron Logan of doing such a thing because it's such a horrible crime. And I also don't want to make light of anyone who claimed that they were abused by Ron either. So without knowing the absolute truth, here's Kristin from Behind the Crime Door to share some insight with you, some nice data and statistics, and then we'll relate that to Delphi. And please, I urge you, if there is domestic violence going on, please do report it. And here's the number. It'll be underneath Kristin.
Hey, everyone. I thank Fig for having me today to talk about domestic violence and some of the statistics out there. Domestic violence is commonly referred to as intimate partner violence, or IPV, and 85% of intimate partner violence victims are women. And a woman is beaten every 9 seconds. Every year, nearly 5.3 million incidents occur among U.S. women age 18 and older. IPV results in nearly 1,300 deaths and 2 million injuries every year in the United States. Women are 5 to 8 times more likely than men to be victimized by an intimate partner, and most IPV incidents are not reported to the police. How does this relate to Delphi? Well, 1 of 3 women will be a victim of domestic violence in her lifetime. Just because people commit domestic violence against their partners does not make them murderers. It can make them extremely violent individuals with all sorts of psychological problems and issues, but they don't necessarily end up or resort to murdering their partner. And I just wanted to point that out and let you guys know. Obviously, this is a huge problem that needs to be addressed. And it is extremely important that not only the offender, but the victims get individual or group therapy regarding this abuse. It's very, very important. Thank you guys so much. And I will see you guys behind the crime door.
So how does this relate to the Delphi murders case? Supporters of the theory that Ron Logan is the Delphi murderer often cite his history of domestic violence as a key argument. However, while such behavior is inexcusable, domestic violence does not directly correlate to committing murder, especially of children. Because if it did, that would mean Delphi, Indiana would have about 495 men that eventually will murder children. And we all know that 495 men didn't commit the murders and are not going to go and kill children. And the only reason why I'm bringing this up is to show that domestic violence is a horrible thing, but it's a separate horrible thing from murdering children. And let's remember, just like Kristin said, a substantial portion of domestic violence incidents go unreported. So just because you don't know about domestic violence, that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It very well could have happened in Rick Allen's home.
But Carroll County dispatch records show he had one encounter with police in 2015. The sheriff said it was a domestic issue where Allen was supposedly drunk and his wife took him to a Lafayette hospital. No law enforcement action was taken, but deputies were sent to his Delphi home to, quote, keep the peace.
Now we're going to talk about how being ordinary doesn't mean that you don't kill people or children. So some of the comments about, oh, Richard Allen would never do anything like that. He was married, he had kids, he had a job. Well, people, there's John Wayne Gacy, Dennis Rader, Gary Ridgway, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, Harold Shipman, Albert Fish, Robert Hansen, Herbert Mullen. I mean, there's a bunch of people who seem normal, that have families, that have normal jobs, like police officers. Maybe they work at CVS. I mean, BTK, he was actually the president of his church. So yeah, these people seem normal, but that doesn't mean they don't do evil things. All right, and last, let's talk about why the defense chose the Odinites over Ron Logan. I mean, that has to be telling that the defense had reports on Ron Logan, and after going through everything, they decided to go with this Viking cult instead of Ron Logan. And it's likely because what got handed over to them were his cell phone records that show he was at the fish store the time of the murders, and there's no way he could have got there and committed the murders and be the killer. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I want to thank my special guest, and as always, thanks for watching.